Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Darth Gen Gary. Hey Steve, I know you are a Trekkie, but I was wondering, what is your view on the philosophy of Kreia in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, mainly about her broad view on ideologies? Kreia's quote from the game is, "To believe in an ideal is to be willing to betray it. It is something no Sith or Jedi has ever truly learned. That is the lesson of strength." The video expands on it more with, "Never live for the sake of another or an ideology. Live for yourself. And if you do believe in an ideology, then find its opposite so that you may reinforce it by correcting its flaws. Become what strengthens an ideology, not a slave to it, by following it dogmatically." You acknowledge that I'm a Star Trek fan, and then you follow that up by asking me a Star Wars question? Do you have any idea how disrespectful that is? I'm just kidding. No, I think that's... there are parts of that you quote in your question that sound a little Randian. You know, the "never live for the sake of another" thing. That sounds very Ayn Randian. But other than that, I think the idea of don't be a dogmatic adherent to an ideology, always be willing to challenge your beliefs, always be willing to entertain opposition, you know, I think that's a really, really good philosophy. I don't really get the sort of opposition to all ideologies that a lot of people sort of promote. They say, "Oh, I don't believe in ideology," and ideology as a concept is not a bad thing. An ideology is just a set of ideas. And an ideology can be good or bad depending on the ideas that are in the set, and also depending on how you, as the adherent to the ideology, live out those ideas. And I think that's good. I mean, I do. I think that's a good way to look at things. You know, have principles, have rules, have a set of values, but also be willing to admit that sometimes something will happen that isn't anticipated by your principles, and you have to be willing to make a decision that may cut against those in order to actually do the right thing. I think that's a good philosophy to have. I have no idea. I've never played the game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I've never engaged with any of the expanded universe Star Wars stuff, so I had no idea who Kreia was before this question, but in this case, I think for the most part, I agree with her. Another Volvox fan, do you consider stuff like literature analysis to be a science? I'm thinking in terms of science revealing or investigating anything about the world, contra revealing or investigating stuff about the subjective person doing it. Something death of the author-ish, just going to a more extreme death of everything except the experiencer. Hope that question makes sense. Yeah, no, it makes sense. For those of you watching who don't quite know what another Volvox fan is talking about, death of the author is a philosophy in literary analysis that says that the opinion of the author about the author's own work should be considered irrelevant, or should be considered no more relevant than anyone else's opinion. And if that is the school that you are going by, if you're conducting your literary analysis according to that principle, then I don't know if you could call it a science. I don't know if, and in fact, in many cases, I don't know if art criticism in general, if it's fair to call it a science. I think there are uses of literary analysis that could be considered scientific, at least in their methodology. If you are using literary analysis the way, for instance, Bible scholars do, to try and determine if a given book of the Bible was written by multiple authors, or try to use syntax or vocabulary choice to determine when this was probably written, or the level of education, or the sort of local idiom in which the author was writing. That, I think, is a scientific application of literary analysis. But if you're doing it in the sense that most literary critics do in the modern era, where you're trying to deconstruct the theme of a story, you're trying to deconstruct maybe the social or political commentary that you perceive within a story, I don't know if it's fair to call that scientific. I think that is that's a form of criticism that is completely valid. And I'm not saying that because it's not scientific, it doesn't count. I think it's very important and it counts very much. And I think being able to speak articulately about what you think and feel in response to art that you encounter, whether it's literature or film or a painting or a sculpture or whatever, is very important and is a very vital skill to have if you want to be someone who cares about art. But I don't think it's scientific because it is very subjective. Scott Bresinger, I was recently compiling a playlist of anti-fascist songs inspired by you-know-who, which for me includes a ton of hardcore punk. I re-listened to the classic Dead Kennedys track Nazi Punks Fuck Off and realized the lyrics, Google them, have a rough metaphorical equivalent to what's happened in YouTube atheism. Just swap out the word punk for atheism and it'll start to fall into place. Obviously, Jello Biafra couldn't have known about YouTube atheism, but in the song's context, the word Nazi wasn't strictly literal. He was describing any jackbooted thug or authoritarian bully. Your thoughts? You know, it would not have occurred to me to interpret the song in a way that applied to YouTube atheism, but yeah, I do think you have something there. I think that's a valid interpretation. Again, going by the death of the author principle, where the original intent of the song is sort of just one of many possible equally valid interpretations. There is, you know, not just in that song, but in the punk scene in general, you know, there's anti-authoritarianism and nonconformity and wanting to lift up the individual, but at the same time wanting to be against racism and sexism. There was a lot of really progressive stuff going on in the punk scene in the 80s, and none of it really fits with the attitudes supported by most of the prominent YouTube atheists, where they are expressly anti-feminist, they are anti-racial justice movements, they express indirect sympathy for white supremacists and Nazis, if not blatant, explicit sympathy or support for white supremacists and Nazis and other organized, you know, agents of intolerance. So yeah, I think they are definitely in the category of the sort of general, non-specific Nazis that are referred to by the lyrics of that song. I think that's really good. I think it's interesting that, you know, they paint themselves as free thinkers. They paint themselves as these rational people who are bound by no ideology, and yet for some reason they continually find themselves taking sides with white supremacists, with Nazis, with all of these authoritarian people, and yet they you know, declare that they are actually anti-authoritarian, and it's the leftists, it's the people that they are constantly attacking and targeting, it's the feminists, it's the Black Lives Matter activists, etc. They're actually the authoritarians, not us, when practically speaking, they're the ones who are carrying the water for the authoritarians and the bigots and the racists and the agents of intolerance. So yeah, I think you're onto something there. Toritas, so this is something I grappled with lately. When does the time for nonviolent resistance end and the need for violent resistance arises? To clarify, I do not think that time has come. But living in Germany, I need to walk less than 100 meters to reach the first monument to 2 murdered Jews, and then less than 200 meters for the next. So I strongly believe that there is a point after which violent resistance not only becomes acceptable, but also a moral imperative. Do you think that there are certain indicators? Or is this more a decision everyone has to make for themselves? It's both. I think there are certain indicators, but I think everyone has to judge for themselves whether they think we have reached those indicators yet. And, you know, there's disagreement over what those indicators are. To me, the main threshold that has to be crossed is when you find that nonviolent resistance is no longer working. When the forces of hate and intolerance are continuing to gain influence and gain power despite the nonviolent resistance that they are meeting, and you face the choice of either sticking with your commitment to nonviolence and allowing fascists to gain power, or setting aside your commitment to nonviolence to fight the fascists and stop them from gaining power. And I don't think we're there yet in the United States, thankfully. I don't think we're really even close to that yet. But one of the reasons why we're not close to that yet, despite the result of last year's presidential election, despite lots of other things, despite the display of open Nazism and white supremacy in Charlottesville and a few other places around the country, is that the nonviolent response has been so overwhelming. And the other thing, the most important part of that, in addition to the nonviolent direct action, which I think needs to continue every time anybody associated with bigotry and intolerance and white supremacy shows their face in public. We have to show up at the polls. We have to vote. We have to vote to make sure that the candidates favored by those people do not continue to gain power and influence. Radical Bacon. My family recently found out that my great-great-great-grandfather was a white-passing black man who had been a slave. Now we're arguing if we should tell my kinda racist mother. She's not a white nationalist, but yeah, she's an old white person who likely will never own up to her internalized racism. My inner troll says we should, but I'm also a bit suspicious of my inner troll's motivations. Thoughts? I would tell her. Personally, I would want to tell her. I would want her to know. Because who knows, maybe she'll surprise you. Maybe she will react more thoughtfully to it than you think she will. Maybe she'll take it as an opportunity for growth. Maybe she'll realize that actually one of her ancestors was a black person, that is part of her heritage, and maybe her kind of racist ideas will come home to her as something that she doesn't want to be a part of anymore. Maybe it'll make her a better person. Maybe it'll make her a more open-minded, aware, sensitive person, And I don't know, at worst, maybe she'll just deny it. I've noticed that a lot. I don't know how old your mother is, but I know for folks that are of maybe for me a generation after my parents, like my grandparents' generation, the most common way I've seen folks like that deal with news like this is to just simply deny it. Even if it's undeniable, even if it's completely justified by evidence and facts. If you were to say to a racist person in their 60s or 70s or 80s, oh, we just found out your great-grandfather was a black man, likely as not, they would just simply refuse to accept it. They would say, well, no, he wasn't. They would say, oh, no, I knew him when I was little. I met him. You didn't know him. I knew him. That was not a black man. He was a white man. Everybody said he was a white man. You have no evidence that they would just completely deny it. So that's, to me, in my admittedly narrow experience, that's the worst thing that would happen. They would just, you would tell them something they would be very uncomfortable with, and they would just refuse to accept it. And the best case scenario is maybe it would be a good thing. Maybe it would be an opportunity for them to open their mind a little and grow a little bit. So I take this for what it's worth. And as I always say when I give advice, please remember, I am not trained in this. I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. But personally, I would want to tell her. Marv Roberts, what white privilege do you experience on a daily basis? Speaking as a black man and a liberal, I'm just wondering, what privilege do you see and experience as a white man? What separates my experiences from your own? I've been pulled over by police for speeding and for having a broken taillight many times. I've never been hassled by the cops. I've never felt as though my life was in danger. I've never thought I better keep my hands on the steering wheel, just in case he thinks I'm dangerous. I've never been bullied or disrespected or insulted by a police officer. I've never had one of my parents give me the talk and say, now if you're pulled over by a cop, make sure you do this, 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 and this, just to be on the safe side. I've never felt, if I had children with my wife who is also white, that I would have to give them such a talk. I've never been followed by employees in a store because they thought I was going to shoplift just based on the color of my skin. I've never felt racially outnumbered. I've never been in the situation where I realized I was the only person of my skin color in a particular place. I haven't had to grow up in a country where there are monuments to people who fought to continue the institutionalized slavery of people like me, just everywhere, especially in the South, but all across the country. I'm reminded many times throughout the day that my experience as a white person is significantly different than the experience of black folks in this country. If your experience as a black person has been better than what the average or the typical black experience seems to be, then I'm very glad for that. I'm very glad that you have, that if that is indeed the case, that you haven't suffered, you know, these indignities and these forms of discrimination to the extent that many of your fellow black folks have. But I know that that is the case for many, many people. And I know that my walk through life as a white person has been a lot easier and a lot less complicated and a lot less filled with obstacles because I have white skin instead of black skin. Jordan Joan P. Hey Steve, I recently got in a heated debate with my dad about Confederate statues. He believes they should stay up, where I, of course, believe in smashing the fuck out of them. Well, anyways, I don't necessarily think my dad is a total racist. He just really enjoys history, especially the Civil War, which is his favorite to learn about, by the way. So I believe he's just ignorant of others' oppressions and blind with his own privilege that he can't see why it's bad. So Steve, my question for you this week is, are some of the pro-statues of Civil War Confederates people just ignorant knuckleheads and need a privilege checker like my dad, or are all just racist jerks? No, they're not all just racist jerks. A lot of it is, and I think this is probably the case with your dad or with folks like your dad, a lot of it is just that in the case of the American Civil War, that was an exception to the rule of history is written by the victors. And I think as a result of that, a lot of people sincerely believe that the Civil War, from the South's perspective, had very little to do with slavery. And that the monuments to Confederate generals or to the Confederate cause are not monuments to white supremacy. They're monuments to Southern pride and Southern heroism. And the fact that they sincerely believe that isn't an excuse. I still think those monuments should be taken down. And I still think that lost cause mentality should be corrected. And this false history that the South was just this benign, noble civilization that was invaded by Northern aggressors and they were just fighting for their way of life. And yeah, slavery was in there, but it wasn't that important. Like, I think that should be totally smashed. I think that's a lie. I think that's a white supremacist lie. But a lot of people grew up being fed that lie and they sincerely believe it. I don't think that's an excuse. I don't think you can say, oh, well, you know, folks like my dad, they genuinely don't think that they're icons of racism, so let's just let them keep the statues. I don't think that is an option at all. And you're not saying that that's an option, but I'm saying it may be tempting for some folks to view it that way, to say, well, people who support those monuments today don't see them as monuments to racism and slavery, so you know what, just let them have them. I think they need to be taken down. Folks like your dad should, we should try to educate them and inform them on how they've been misled by the lost cause mentality. But even if they'd never quite catch up, I think the monument should still be taken down. Yep. And now this monument to rambling, semi-coherent answers to questions needs to be taken down. And we need to move into a slightly pithier section of the video, which is a little something I like to call the lightning round. Man, when I try to think up a segue on the spot like that, it's just the worst, isn't it? Boy. Harry was right to give me shit about my segues last week. I deserved that. Piker Eyes. I will soon be required to testify against a man who shoplifted some products from the store I work in, and I'm somewhat worried that if I do not take the traditional oath of so help me God, that those make the decision of guilty or not guilty will see my testimony as less than that of a Christian testimony. This guy is guilty. We caught him red-handed. Would you just say the traditional oath to ensure justice is done? Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't worry about that stuff too much. If I were testifying and when they were swearing me in, they said, you know, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I would just say I do, or yes. I wouldn't stumble over it or worry too much about it. I would just affirm the oath, you know, if that's what you're asked to do. I would, obviously, in a perfect world, I would prefer that they never say, so help you God. But if they do, I mean, you know, I would just say yes. Zombie Pineapple. I actually have a question. Good to hear you're finally a Doctor Who fan. My favorites are the early Eccleston shows. Any chance of some reviews from a newcomer's perspective? Possibly. I don't know. I might. I really enjoyed the Eccleston series as well. I'm still only like 2 episodes into the first David Tennant series, so I'm mostly an Eccleston viewer at this point too, because I haven't had time to get that much further into it. But yeah, I really enjoyed that first series, the Christopher Eccleston series. And I don't know, I might make a video about it. We'll see. I don't have any specific plans, but I mean, I'm sure I'll end up talking about it at some point because I have really enjoyed what I've seen so far. Joshua Purvis, hi Steve. My question is, if you were going back in time, what Universal monster movies would you want to see in theaters? Me, the Wolfman and Frankenstein. And can you subscribe to my channel? Thanks. It's Joshua Purvis with the Batman pick. Sure, I'll subscribe to you, Joshua. And yeah, man, it's so tough to choose. What Universal monster movie would I want to see? I would definitely want to see the Wolfman and probably the Invisible Man. I think the Invisible Man might actually be my favorite of all of the original Universal monster movies, so I would go with that one. Dylan Jones, what on earth is that green ball on your ceiling in the An Atheist Reads videos? That's a big-ass Christmas ornament. I can't remember who gave us that, but someone gave my wife and I that as a gift years and years ago. This just humongous, big old, gaudy Christmas ornament, and I don't think we've ever hung it on the Christmas tree. We hung it from the light fixture in the middle of the living room ceiling, and it's just been there ever since. Every once in a while, I'll hold the cat up, and she'll swat at it. So it's a giant Christmas ornament / cat toy. Mike Walker, thanks for answering my lightning round question. The joke was that his nickname is Lemmy, so Lemmy, listen. Too obscure, I suppose. Mike, don't ever blame yourself. If I don't get a joke, which was the case with your Lemmy question last week, that's on me, man. That's not on you. Don't ever blame yourself, please. Blame me. Punish me. Corey Donaldson, lightning round question. What would you do if someone threw a wasp's nest at you? Corey, oh, I don't know if I've ever told you how much I appreciate your brain. Because sometimes you come up with these just incredibly inventive questions that I can't imagine anyone else ever asking me. And I love that about you. Well, I have no idea. No one's ever thrown a wasp's nest at. I scream, run away, just flee in blind panic, probably. If I were a boss, I would say, I don't know, I would catch it and I would throw it back at him. But you know, that's certainly not what I would do. It would probably be more like, ah, and then I would run away screaming. That's what I would do, probably, if anybody threw a wasp's nest at me. Thank you for asking me that question that no one has ever asked me before. Droopy of the Northwest Mounted, paper or plastic, Kirk or Picard, Coke or Pepsi, and do you want fries with that? Plastic, Kirk, Coke, and yes, always. I always want fries. Samuel Sturgill, Steve, what are some things that should be done about America's obesity epidemic? I myself live in Kentucky, which has the 8th highest rate in the states, plus the #1 highest smoking rate. A lot of the southern states are in the top 10. Funny thing is, poor people are more likely to be fat because fatty foods are cheaper. Yeah, I'm aware of that statistic, and I think one of the most important things that can be done is to raise the federal minimum wage to a living wage. Give people more money so that they can afford to buy healthier food. Because you're absolutely right. A lot of the reason that economically disadvantaged folks tend to eat far less healthy foods than people who are doing a little better financially is that the crap is cheaper. And yeah, I think raising wages is a very important step to helping fight the obesity epidemic. Put more money in people's pockets so they can afford to buy better, healthier food. Rashid Q. Hey Steve, quick question. Rashid Key. I am so sorry for I don't have any idea how to pronounce that name. Rashid K. Hey Steve, quick question. I watch a lot of your Star Trek videos and was wondering, why do you hate Deanna Troi? I just think she's a terribly written character. I don't think the writers ever did her any favors. I think it's not Marina Sirtis' fault, because I think she's a lovely woman and a very good actress, and she did the best that she could with what she was given. But I just think Deanna was always written as a terrible character, you know, and I never felt like they they gave any reason for why she was there on the bridge, other than she's the captain's counselor and she can tell him things that the other people are thinking that he wouldn't know otherwise. But often when she did that, she was wrong, or she would say, "I'm sorry, Captain, I don't sense any deception," when he was being deceptive. She was just a very, very poorly written character. And it's no fault of the actress, it's the fault of the writers who put a character in a very prominent position that they clearly had no idea what to do with. Ever. Like for the entire run of the series, I don't think they ever figured her out. Jacob Zentichko, do anything interesting during the eclipse while Superman couldn't recharge and was out of action? Yeah, I took a lovely trip to Addis Ababa and I stole the most interesting green meteorite. Not sure what I'll do with it, but yeah, that was fun. Hey, that was the last question. That's it for the questions. That's it for the lightning round. It's time now for the shout out. And the shout out this week goes to the Foundation Beyond Belief, and specifically to the Foundation Beyond Belief's Hurricane Harvey relief efforts. I was so proud and privileged and happy to be just one small part of a very quickly organized live broadcast of the Gaytheist Manifesto podcast this past weekend, where we were able, over the course of 4 hours, I was only on for 1 hour, but the event lasted for 4 hours, and they were able to raise over $3,000 for Foundation Beyond Belief's Hurricane Harvey relief efforts. And if you were unable to watch or listen to that show at the time, or you just didn't hear about it, and you want to give to continue to support their ongoing relief efforts, you can go to fbbgive.org and you can donate to the Foundation Beyond Belief's humanist relief efforts, which are supporting relief efforts on the ground in Houston and the surrounding area to help victims of Hurricane Harvey. Your help is still very much needed, and organizations like Foundation Beyond Belief, who are trying to get resources in the hands of people there in the aftermath of that storm, who need them, are just doing tremendous work. And if you can possibly throw a couple of dollars toward them to help them do that work, I would urge you to do so. It's fbbgive.org if you want to support humanists trying to help out in the wake of a terrible disaster like Hurricane Harvey. fbbgive.org. That's the shout out. I also want to remind you, as always, to give a listen to the Lemme Listen family of podcasts. These are podcasts that are created and for the most part hosted by my very good friend Jason Harding, aka Jason with a D, aka Jason with a J, aka the Puppet Master of Opinionville. And I want to specifically draw your attention to the Late Seating podcast, which is a movie review podcast that Jason hosts with me, where we take a fresh look at a classic movie, a movie that has a reputation of either being good or bad, and we decide for ourselves whether we think it deserves its reputation, and we have a few laughs along the way. Now, I had promoted that our next episode, which goes up today, would be about The Sandlot, but unfortunately our Sandlot episode went awry, and it's my fault. There was a technical glitch on my end, and I was unable to successfully record my part of the show. So we're putting up a rerun instead, but we recorded a nice little new intro to sort of explain and apologize for the snafu that killed our Sandlot show. But it'll be a rerun of a classic episode that you can listen to instead, plus our new introduction. And you can listen to that and all of the past episodes of all of the all of the excellent Let Me Listen podcasts by going to lemmelistenpodcast.com. And I do wish that you would do that, even though I really screwed up the new episode. It's still worth, let's not abandon the entire podcasting enterprise just because I screwed up once. I don't think that's fair. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Do what your heart tells you to do. That's it for me, everybody. I'm out of here. I want to remind you, as always, to please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next You Had to Ask video. So please do leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. In order for these videos to happen, you have to ask. So please do ask me a question for next time. That's it, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care. Hey folks, one more thing before I go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron of this channel. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you next time.